Hi everybody, welcome to chapter 4 in our textbook. We're going to be looking at the fourth way of change, which is from Andy Hargraves. If you watched the previous video, you know that this one is kind of looking at school from a business and policy perspective, which I think is important. I also think that some of you will probably disagree with some of the things that are said here. Some of you might agree with it. Some of you will find it annoying. I think it's important to note that we're finally hitting a point where in education people are looking at P-12 education as a business. There are good things that are coming out of it. Is it all good? No. People are worried about losing the human aspect and the human involvement in schools. But the sooner that we start to accept the fact that looking at schools as a business isn't going anywhere, I think the more effective our learning and our understanding of schools as organizations probably can be. So the fourth way of change is written to look at partnerships and professionalism to improve schools. They're going to use the words partnerships, which is basically their way of saying getting business involved in schools. But this is Andy Hargraves. He's smart. He's doing this as a way to say, well, yeah, we're going to have business influence, but it's going to be a partnership, which is great. I do want to note that this chapter was written prior to Barack Obama's long-term presidency, so a lot of the stuff that's presented in it looked at education in his reform futuristically. We're looking at some of the bad things that have gone on with school reform and what that looks like and can be if you allow bad things to occur. So the authors note that only 15% of U.S. educators believe that No Child Left Behind improved public education. My question for all of you watching this is it any different now? Is Race to the Top essentially another way of looking at No Child Left Behind? Is it similar? Are there elements of it that are different? There are a few, but is it very similar to No Child Left Behind? One of the things that was, an effect of No Child Left Behind was the idea that science, social studies, arts, and foreign language were cut from a lot of school systems to increase time in math and literacy. Did it improve math and literacy? Well, yeah. Historically, math and literacy are up in the United States from the passing of No Child Left Behind. So 10 years later after this, our math and our literacy scores are up. So did the goal of No Child Left Behind work? Well, partially it did. But what were the unintended consequences of it? Well, we lost time in arts and sciences. Then now we're saying, was that worth it? Was it worth the changes? So one of the things that the authors of this chapter look at was the way that Bill Clinton and Tony Blair modeled education, which was focusing on social democracy. The authors are going to provide each way to say what way education looks like, and then they're going to transition into what they call now is the fourth way. So we're going to take a look at the ways, and we'll discuss them a little bit. So the first way was this notion of the state is an agent for welfare and the state as an agent for dependency. This happened in the 1960s, and one of you will look at this in this class when we're talking about the Great Society movement. We basically said that we need to have social justice, support the poor, and position so that everybody can overcome any problems that they had in society. It was a great idea. I don't think anybody can disagree that that wasn't a good idea. However, the problem with this movement was the people that received the support, not all of them, but the vast majority of them, couldn't do it on their own then. And they were put in positions where they were basically dependent on the state. They got back on their feet, but the state dependency was just kept. So this was a major problem because it didn't foster long-term sustainability. So we created a welfare society, the society depended on it, and that just was the way it was. The second way was really this notion of reducing support for social services. So we said the first way wasn't working, so now we're going to change it, and we're going to outsource them to the private sector. So this led to increase in mandates, school regulations, and it also increased high-stakes accountability. So this really sucked the passion out of teaching and education, and it changed it as a whole, because if we reduced our social supports and we focused on accountability and mandates, we can all obviously know that this caused our focus to now be on your core perennial subjects. So that was the second way. So then the third way was the middle of the reform movement. And once again, I think it's important to note that I am not condoning and saying that the way that Democrats do things is the way that education should be. This is a reform class, not a politics class. But the authors of this chapter highly support Democrat movement in education. You have to know that if you're looking at the chapters. This is why I said at the beginning of our class, there are going to be some chapters that you completely agree with and some that you completely disagree with. Some of you will probably agree with this chapter, some of you won't. The Clinton and Tony Blair reform was this middle support for education. You had increased support, school choice, basically you can choose your schools if you can prove that what's going on isn't working, and increased positioning of facilities for those who need, for those who need them. Look what the authors say. The authors state these are good things. So obviously these are authors that would support this movement in education. So the authors speak about Finland in Finnish education and why it's among, arguably the top country in the world for education. I also think it's important that we understand the context of Finland in the education system. Teachers are revered in Finland. They do teacher and principal rotations where occasionally the principal goes back into the classroom and becomes the teacher, and other teachers step in and be the principal. Teachers are paid almost the same that doctors are paid. The acceptance rate in teacher education programs are 1 in 10. So we're looking at this. Paraprofessional support is huge in Finland as well. What I think is important is you have to understand that while this model might be great, this model might not necessarily work because we're at a teacher shortage in the United States. If we cut the acceptance rate and said only 1 out of every 10 people would become teachers, then you're still going to need teachers. If we increase the pay for teachers, that's not going to help because that money would have to be cut from somewhere else. So their system is much different than ours, but I think there are takeaways. The big takeaway is that teachers and principals are treated like they are professionals. They're treated on the same revere and level as doctors are, lawyers are, and I think that's important. If you take one thing away from any of the lecture on Finland, that's what I would strongly suggest that you do. So, Hargraves says, we network for power. This is why I like him, because he says, partner with the community, because the word business scares people away instead of saying partner with business. He notes that the curriculum has to be altered to work with people who have different learning styles, basically looking at your community demographics and seeing what they're capable of learning and what they're capable of doing to impact change in a school setting. So, change arising from communities, I think we all know kind of how important community engagement is, but we look at it linked up to bottom-up reform. If you can get parents involved and invested in schools, you do change the schools, you change everything about them because the parents now have stake. You have to worry about them having too much stake, but it's better that they have some and they're involved. As crazy and as dumb as it sounds, the easiest way to get parents involved, especially in your lower socioeconomic districts, is to provide food nights and offer food. But while they're eating, you provide them with educational training that's relevant. And sure, that's a mini, micro, fine-grained thing, but it can improve our schools. Another suggestion that was made in the book that I do need to mention in our context is this notion of if you have a large school, you divide it up. We know this works. We know that if you have a large school, you divide it up. Look at Broken Arrow in Oklahoma as a school district. This is a district that is going to be growing by 15 to 20% over the next 5 years. I know, as an educator, and my belief is that that high school should be broken up into 2. And nobody would disagree with me that it needs to happen. However, if you do that, you have changed the culture and the climate of that district so much to a point that you're going to have angry community members, angry students, angry parents, probably angry teachers. But does it need to happen? Yes, it does need to happen. Could they afford to do it there? Yeah, I think they could afford to do it there. But then we're looking at changing what parents in the community might want. But we know that we can improve schools by doing that. But the question is, does broken arrow really need improved? And that's the argument that people would make. So the fourth way is basically looking at what's being done in Finland and moving it towards innovative practices that could work at the United States. It's looking at purpose and partnership, professionalism, and coherence. So what are we going to look at when we talk about the purpose of schools and the purpose of education? I think these are all also no-brainers. I think we're going to find a vision that works for everybody, so that you can not only improve schools for your highest learner, but you can for your lowest learner as well. Your teachers are going to be tied to the vision as well. The community is involved. There is engagement with the public. It doesn't have to be just people that have children in the district. It can be with business as well. Different social services have to be able to partner with the school. One of my challenges as an elementary school administrator was knowing the supports for social services that I could use that could help me in my school. And I had a very good guidance counselor. Had I not had a good guidance counselor, I never received the training to know how to involve the welfare department, social services, how to get involved in custody battles. But I had a guidance counselor who had that experience. That's important. You have to understand where the social services are that can help your buildings and can help your district as well. Business and education have to partner equally to create a good environment, for students. And this is that notion of CSR that you see, which is corporate social responsibility, but we're changing now to corporate educational responsibility. Students have to be involved in it as well. If you want to really change things, the students have to see the change, know the change, and understand why it's occurring. So, what is professionalism? Professionalism is high-quality teachers that are paid appropriately, professional autonomy, and that are trained rigorously. I come from Pennsylvania, and I note this because everybody thinks Pennsylvania pays their teachers so well. That is a myth of the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania will pay teachers who've been there 20-plus years. Some of them will be making over $100,000 in their school district, and that's no joke. You can look at teacher contracts and you can see it. But their starting salaries are very low. So it's a deterrent for people to get into the profession when they're going to start at $28,000, $29,000, $30,000, $31,000, $32,000 because they're paid poorly in the beginning. If they can wait it out, they get paid more, but when somebody has that spark and that excitement in education, they have it early on in their career. I would have been, if I was a high school teacher, I would have been going on to my 14th year right now, and I would have been making somewhere around $52,000 or $53,000 after 14 years, without any overages, any opportunity to get paid extra. But that's what I would have been making. I would have been lucky if I was making about $50,000. Now, 5 years from now, I would have hit what's called a jump step, and I would have been making over 90 to teach. But would I have had the same motivation, the same drive and determination that I had early in my career? Probably not. You have to be considered professional, and you have to be treated as professionals. All teachers do, all principals do, and all superintendents do. You know what I've said already about principals being caught in the middle. I don't see any way to fix that. They're always going to be caught in the middle because they have to meet the demands of the teachers while meeting the demands of central administration as well. Lively learning communities, I'm just going to leave that out there. That's the professional learning community element that we're going to talk about really in depth later on in this course when we're looking at the other textbook. So, then you have to have coherence in your system. Leadership has to be sustainable. You have to take off the plate of what your leaders are doing and give them capacity and autonomy to do more. If you have 10 to 12 initiatives a year, there is no way that that building principal is going to accomplish all 10 or 12 of them. You have to create networks of mutual learning. Schools have to support and learn from each other and not compete. They have to work together. And it has to happen in district too. If you have 7 elementary schools, those 7 elementary schools need to be on the same page and they need to be working together and cooperating with each other. You have to be responsible before you're accountable, meaning that you have to build in components of ethics and make sure that you're acting in a fair nature to all the students that are in your building. I like the idea of building from the bottom because all of your major reform efforts to improve a building are going to come at the building. That has to come from the ground up, and that principal, that leader, and that teaching staff has to be involved in those decisions. But then we steer from the top, meaning central administration is the one that should be driving it and should be approving what's going on. So the authors give credit to Duncan and Obama and say they realize that something has gone wrong with our education system. It's tough because I would ask all of you, what would the authors say now? Would they be satisfied with the Obama reforms or think that it was more of the same? I don't like to judge authors in school reform until they've been, reformers themselves until they've been out of office for at least 4 years. So I don't really think we'll see the effects that President Obama had on education till 2020. Some might argue otherwise. I don't think so. I think there has to be a period of time where we let it see what happens and see what it caused, and that's something to think about. So the next chapter is also historical. I'm going to be talking about Pedro Noguera, who really works with transforming high schools. The thought on this is really that the high school principal, it is the most important person in the district next to the superintendent. Your top 2 paid officials in a school district, and whether you believe me or not, number 1 should be the superintendent and number 2 should be that high school principal. They are the ones that are on the front line more than anybody else. They're the ones most likely to be on the front page of the newspaper, and they're the ones that are going to be spending so much time and so much of their life in schools. You also know too that high school principals lead in the country in divorce rates. So knowing that, it's probably one of the reasons why it is the toughest job there is. So think about that as we engage Chapter 5 by Pedro Noguera. Thank you.